When it comes to the state of cable news, it's no wonder that more and more people are turning to comedy in order to become informed about the world. And shows like The Colbert Report and The Daily Show have served that purpose for years. But ever since a Democrat took office in 2008, many on the left have criticized these programs for placating the establishment rather than exposing it. Here's just a few examples.
Bill, what are you talking about? Literally! I do agree with you. I think that it's an easy target. The Blackwater, your name is Blackwater, for God's sakes.
How amongst the 99% did I still feel like I didn't fit in?
But no matter how many epic takedowns Jon Stewart does of Fox News, there's still a huge gap to be filled when it comes to actual alternative voices. That's where the two founders of the independent program Citizen Radio come in. Comedian Jamie Kilstein and journalist Allison Kilkenny just wrote their own takedown of The Daily Show in their new book, NEWSFAIL, a satirical account of the media's abysmal failures when it comes to covering real issues. I was joined earlier by both of them, and I first asked Jamie why so many young people are turning to comedy for their news.
One of our first interviews on Citizen Radio was with Janine Garofalo, and it was so interesting because we thought she sort of like voluntarily put herself out there to be anti-war in the beginning of the Iraq invasion. But in reality, the cable news channels, they wanted like a general to defend the war, and on the other side, like a comedian from The Truth About Cats and Dogs. Like they wanted, that dynamic was like very on purpose, where it was like, okay, for the war, a 5-star general, and against the war, like a cardboard cutout of Osama bin Laden. And like they did that, it was very on purpose. So, I mean, but the problem is the news is so bad, and so many people do kind of go to John Oliver or, us. And comedy is a really good language. It's a very human language. It's not academic. We all use humor to get out of bad situations. And I actually think it's the perfect delivery method for a lot of these like terrible stories.
Yeah, and I think John Oliver has been really effective so far because he's been able to control the content because he's not doing as many interviews. Because Jon Stewart, and we mentioned this in the book, has said time and time again that he's a comedian, he's not a journalist. And that's really apparent when he tries to interview someone, like Donald Rumsfeld, right, that he is a comedian first.
Right, no, let's talk about that, because of course I've criticized Bill Maher, I've criticized Jon Stewart. I keep getting told, these are the wrong people to call out. I mean, is it fair to criticize someone who's consistently claims, I'm just a comedian, I'm not even a journalist, for partly for perpetuating the status quo, essentially?
Right. Well, I know John knows that he's a comedian, but unfortunately, a lot of young people who watch The Daily Show, that is their primary source of news. The Daily Show audience in general are more news savvy. That's how they get the jokes. They need the context to understand the jokes. But yeah, I mean, it's not John's fault, and we say that in the book. This was never Jon Stewart's purpose or job or duty, but because of NEWSFAIL, Jon Stewart was put in that place where suddenly he had to take up that mantle because, what are people going to do? Listen to Wolf Blitzer for news? Like, obviously that's not going to happen.
No, and I mean, also John was one of the reasons I got into stand-up comedy. It's, Abby, geez, that's what Salon took from our book and published it. And you get so many old white dudes who are so mad if you go after Jon Stewart, no matter how many nice things you say first. But I'm sorry, you can't claim to not be political and then have William Crystal and other war hawks as your most common guests. I know you criticize them, but really young liberals see you yucking it up with them, and you're humanizing them. So if you're not a political show, don't have them on. You're making that choice. That is a political choice to have them on. And yeah, you can call Mike Huckabee a homophobe, but Mike Huckabee is a dude who literally thinks gay people with AIDS should be shipped to AIDS Island. Don't give that guy even airtime. Don't give him any validation.
Right, and Eric Prince too. I mean, that was just disgusting. Sorry.
That was
horrible. That was really, really embarrassing.
Especially after John, the first time, even though he apologized, went after Jeremy Scahill and made fun of all of his research and his book about Blackwater. And then, you have Eric Prince come on to hawk whatever weird murder campaign he's hawking. It's a bummer. I mean, it was a real bummer for us because we watched The Daily Show every night for a really long time, and we're not trying to take its place by any means. But yeah, when you're on cable, there's definitely restrictions. activists.
Right, let's sum this conversation about Stewart up by talking about Rally to Restore Sanity, which you guys talk about in the book too. Jamie, how did that demonstrate how no one in the establishment press really understands the importance of activism?
Yeah, it was, again, a real bummer. And what the conservative, a real bummer, but you can quote me on that. To quote Noam Chomsky, it was just like a real bummer. Yeah, so what the right is really good at is they're really good at making MSNBC seem radical. They're really good at making Jon Stewart seem radical. When they call Barack Obama a black socialist Muslim, I'm like, I wish Barack Obama was like a radical militant, Black Panther. That would be amazing at this point. And so the problem is you have all these kids who are new to politics and they're using comedy to get into politics, and that's what I did. Allie did that, not as much as I did, but Allie did that too. And then they see this big rally and they get really excited because they're like, okay, tens of thousands of people like me are gonna go do something political. For the first time in my life, we got so many emails from people who this was the first political event they went to. It's nerve-wracking to go to a political event. And they go, and the mantra is essentially to make fun of activists. Right. And that's what they did with this amazing opportunity. I mean, they actually had Kid Rock sing a song like the anthem that was like something like, we're going to war, but what can you do? Nothing much. Like, it was so weird. Yeah. It was so weird.
I also don't understand, so you're not a political show, but you're holding a quasi-political rally that is saying that politics is lame. That was really the moment where I think a lot of people were like, what is this?
And Allison, let's talk about Occupy really quickly. As someone who was really involved in the movement, what disconnect did you see between your experience on the ground and the way it was being portrayed in the so-called liberal media?
Listen to how fast I'm going to say it. Erin Burnett was the disconnect immediately, the biggest one I saw. But she wasn't alone by any means. It was really a bizarre moment to be standing in Zuccotti Park and to see the mainstream coverage of Occupy Wall Street. And it was just weird and incorrect and really hateful and such a clear agenda that, Erin Burnett, Andrew Sorkin and the New York Times were so quick to try to discredit this entire movement. In the case of Andrew Sorkin, it was at the behest of his CEO buddy who called him up on the phone and said, I'm a little worried about these occupiers. Can you go down and check it out for me? And Andrew dutifully hurried down there and said, it's okay, boss. It looks good. It's not violent yet. But it was just really embarrassing.
Yeah, and I wasn't down there as much as Allison. Allison was one of the first journalists to cover it. But when I went down there, I never saw violence. I saw kids who set up medical tents. I saw Nobel Prize winners giving speeches to 20 or so people with no microphone.
Yeah, there was violence, but it was on the police were the violent ones.
Yes.
They were the ones being incredibly violent towards the protesters.
And what was so interesting is that was the first time you sort of saw people start to talk about police brutality more because it was happening to white bloggers and not just people of color.
Yes.
Where they were like, wait a second, a blogger from Salon can get pepper sprayed? What have these policemen up to?
Jamie, you get a lot of crap for this. I mean, you talk about entitlement, you talk about misogyny, you get viciously attacked all the time. Why are you so adamant about taking away rights for men?
I've never gotten more hate mail in my life than when I said, not that people should be censored, but that when I said that I don't think making fun of people who are raped is funny.
Yeah, I mean, I lost a lot of support. Everybody loved me when I was covering Occupy Wall Street and class war, but I started talking about feminism, and suddenly, I lost a lot of followers. A lot of people were like, you used to do good work before you started sticking up for the ladies.
Yeah, people would literally be like, hey, stick to Occupy. Don't talk about lady stuff. Yeah. And it's like, man, how can you write that and not feel like such a tool?
You're not going to win your class revolution without ladies.
Right.
Sorry to tell you that.
And I mean, it's really interesting, right? Where it's like, where you have all these bros who are like, the NSA is spying on me and they're looking at my Google history. And it's like, what's in your Google history? Stolen naked pictures of female celebrities that would never talk to me. And it's like, when it comes to women, you see it as much on the left. I mean, it's nuts. Of all the things, if you asked me 5 years ago, of all the things that would get me the most hate and alienated and stuff like that, I certainly would not have thought it was saying that rape is bad.
Yeah.
And to see it come full circle where people actually say misandry, I don't even know where that word came from, and that, like, you know, the black on white crime. Why aren't you covering black on white crime? It's just like, what reality are you living in? I do not understand.
So the one thing that should make all of your cool listeners feel better is my spell check still does not recognize misandry whenever I type it.
Like, what?
Like, spell check is like, this isn't a word. Look around. Women don't get paid equally. And I'm like, thanks, spell check.
Let's talk about the biggest news fail of all, you guys. Allison, your book outlines so many, but perhaps the biggest one, climate change. How in the hell is the media continuing to frame this as a debate when the facts speak for themselves? How is an issue that would literally end life as we know it still so politicized?
So I think a lot of it has to do with ratings. When the mainstream media just presents it as clear fact, there's no tension. So what they tend to do is invite people on to have a debate, even though there really isn't a debate. And we've spoken with people in the mainstream media who say, unfortunately, when they cover climate change, people stop watching the news. So that just illustrates one of the limitations of the mainstream media, and that's why alternative media is so important, because we can talk about climate change all we want, and we don't have to worry about ratings.
Yeah. If I were a mainstream comedian, I'd say their ratings plummet like the temperature, and then I'd high five everybody, and then I'd have a TV show.
We'd have so much money.
We have so much money. Yeah, Abby, I really liked what you said, where it's like, you can't cover the pretend deficit if we're all like on fire and like drowning. And I think on a more personal level, I mean, I've even been guilty of this. I mean, we all probably have, right? Where like, there are so many immediate, I think there are a lot of good people who would care about climate change. It's really easy for us to talk about, you know, the mainstream media and half their commercials being for like big oil and stuff like that. And all of that is like definitely a factor, like 100%. But I think a lot of good people get sort of forced into apathy because of the economy. I mean, I really hate when like progressives talk about like, oh, well, why don't these idiots like know better? Like when it comes to like wars or when it comes to whatever. And it's like, because they have 2 jobs, because they're trying to feed their kids, and they get home and they watch the news and they don't have time to watch RT or Democracy Now!
Yeah, and the news they're supposed to be translators. They're supposed to give people the bullet points. And if they don't do that, then everybody's pretty much screwed, because they're not getting the facts that they need.
Yeah, which is another reason I think that we've like gravitated towards using humor and sort of breaking stuff down in a human way, or like talking about when we make mistakes, or like in the book, like we're very like vulnerable. We talk about when we used to be idiots. And I think it's really important, because, you know, the people who don't act like that are the ones who go on the news every week who are wrong about literally everything. William Crystal is on TV every week to talk about a new war when he has done nothing but been wrong about wars. Like, if you are wrong about a war and you go on the news to talk about a new war, like, it should say under your name, like, William Crystal, like, wrong about Iraq and Afghanistan, or like, you should sit that war out. Like, you shouldn't be allowed to keep going on TV and being wrong and pretentiously wrong. So I think there's definitely something to just being like human and conversational and making jokes, and like some people don't like it, but
and beyond that, I think it just shows that an issue like climate change, as you said, the most important issue of our time, shouldn't be left up to something like ratings. It shouldn't matter at that point. But unfortunately, our corporate media is forced into those constraints.
Right, and you summed it up really well. I love how there's just war propaganda is paraded around literally every single day. But I think another issue is that the burden is kind of put on the consumer, as well it should be, but it's also not, you're not looking at the source. Like, I want to talk about the meat industry now, because if we're talking about climate change, I think the meat industry is a really, really big factor. And even organizations like Greenpeace and the Sierra Club don't really touch it in the way that they should. Why? I mean, why are we kind of omitting this giant factor to climate change out of the conversation? What do you guys think?
I think once they sued Oprah, everybody got really scared, because they were like, who sues Oprah? That is terrible. That's like now like suing like Beyonce. Like, no, you don't do that at all.
Suing God, yeah. I think there's a lot of people who have been in the environmental movement a very long time who are operating under the false assumption that they can partner with corporate interests to fix the climate. And that's wrong. It will not work. We can't do things within, you know, the limits of those constraints.
Yeah, and I mean, also it's something that changes your life when you start to talk about meat and like something I will say as a vegan, but hopefully not a vegan that people hate, is that food means a lot to a lot of people. When I'm really sad, I think about food. When I'm celebrating something, like, you go out and you think about food. And we are raised thinking that a McNugget is not chicken, but is something called a McNugget, right? Like, we don't think about where our food comes from. And we all love animals, right? Like, we have like cats and dogs, and like we grow up on Disney movies. Like, we don't want to think about where our food comes from, and that 99.9% of it is from these terrible factory farms where the animals are tortured, and it's the #1 contributor to global warming. I mean, when that NATO report came out that said that, or the UN report, it really made a lot of people think. Like, my brother, who was like one of those like meathead wrestlers who would wave bacon in front of my face, suddenly like went vegetarian. And by the way, became a better wrestler after that. But people started like really talking about it because it wasn't like a PETA pamphlet, or like it wasn't like a lyric in a Morrissey song. Like, this is the UN.
I think people are beginning to understand it's not a lifestyle. It actually could save the world.
Yeah, and it's really cool to actually do something, because you can only, I mean, you go to so many protests that the news doesn't cover, and you start to feel kind of helpless. And I think you need to keep going to those, but I don't know, every day you don't support factory farms or you don't eat meat, like, you're actually making a tangible difference like that day.
Right, and it's the ultimate form of direct action, right? Because what's more personal or direct than what you choose to put in your own body? So if you feel helpless, that's actually a really easy, immediate way that you can protest.
Yeah, I mean, the sad thing is more people are going vegetarian, not because of climate change, but because of vanity, and suddenly all these nutritionists are like, oh, this isn't good for you. But like, I'll take that. That's cool with me.
You guys, I've been an avid listener of Citizen Radio for so long. It's so awesome to have you both on. NEWSFAIL, everyone check it out. Buy the book. Allison Kilkenny, Jamie Kilstein, you guys are awesome. Thanks so much.
You're the best.
Thank you so much.
That dynamic was like very on purpose, where it was like, okay, for the war, a 5-star general, and against the war, like a cardboard cutout of Osama bin Laden. And like, they did that, it was very on purpose. So, I mean, but the problem is the news is so bad, and so many people do kind of go to John Oliver or, you know, us. And comedy is a really good language. It's a very human language. It's not academic. We all use humor to get out of bad situations. And I actually think it's the perfect delivery method for a lot of these like terrible stories.
Yeah, and I think John Oliver has been really
Blackwater. Your name is Blackwater, for God's sakes.
How amongst the 99% did I still feel like I didn't fit in?
But no matter how many epic takedowns Jon Stewart does of Fox News, there's still a huge gap to be filled when it comes to actual alternative voices. That's where the two founders of the independent program Citizen Radio come in. Comedian Jamie Kilstein and journalist Allison Kilkenny just wrote their own takedown of The Daily Show in their new book, NEWSFAIL, a satirical account of the media's abysmal failures when it comes to covering
effective so far, because he's been able to control the content because he's not doing as many interviews. Because Jon Stewart, and we mentioned this in the book, has said time and time again that he's a comedian, he's not a journalist. And that's really apparent when he tries to interview someone, you know, like Donald Rumsfeld, that he is a comedian first.
Right. No, let's talk about that, because, of course, I've criticized Bill Maher, I've criticized Jon Stewart. I keep getting told, you know, these are the wrong people to call out. I mean, is it fair to criticize someone who's consistently claims, I'm just a comedian, I'm not even a journalist, for partly for perpetuating the status quo? Central issues. I was joined earlier by both of them, and I first asked Jamie why so many young people are turning to comedy for their news.
One of our first interviews on Citizen Radio was with Janeane Garofalo, and it was so interesting because we thought she sort of like voluntarily put herself out there to be anti-war in the beginning of the Iraq invasion. But in reality, the cable news channels, they wanted like a general to defend the war, and on the other side, like a comedian from The Truth About Cats and Dogs. Like, they wanted, it was...
When it comes to the state of cable news, it's no wonder that more and more people are turning to comedy in order to become informed about the world. And shows like The Colbert Report and The Daily Show have served that purpose for years. But ever since a Democrat took office in 2008, many on the left have criticized these programs for placating the establishment rather than exposing it. Here's just a few examples.
Bill, what are you talking about? Literally. I do agree with you. I think that it's an easy target.